What happens when a 35-year-old African president walks into a room filled with the most powerful leaders and billionaires on the planet, and instead of begging, he presents a vision so bold it changes the course of history? This story takes place on March 15th inside the King Abdulaziz Conference Center in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. A place where decisions are made over coffee, deals are sealed with handshakes, and the fate of nations can shift in an instant. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, aged 38, entered this summit with a reputation. Known for his ambitious Vision 2030 plan, he was transforming Saudi Arabia from an oil-dependent economy into a diversified global powerhouse. The stakes were high. Today, the Crown Prince would decide which global projects would receive funding from Saudi Arabia's $2 trillion public investment fund. The room was packed with billionaires and world leaders, tech magnates from Silicon Valley, oil executives from Houston, manufacturing giants from Europe, and heads of state representing the most influential economies. Each came with proposals promising technological breakthroughs, renewable energy projects, and innovative city developments. Amid the familiar faces was one unexpected attendee, IBRAHIM Traoré, president of Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso, a small, landlocked nation in West Africa, with a GDP of barely $15 billion, less than many in the room spent on weekend acquisitions. It had little infrastructure, limited resources, and almost no global influence. The murmurs started immediately. Why was he here? What could Burkina Faso possibly offer a wealthy kingdom like Saudi Arabia? Many delegates whispered doubts. Some outright dismissed his presence. The German delegation even asked, "What does Burkina Faso have that Saudi Arabia could want?" The summit began with presentations, each carefully polished and rehearsed, yet following the same predictable pattern. Slides showed growth charts, market analyses, and profit forecasts. The Crown Prince listened, nodding politely, but gave no commitments. Then, as the room broke for lunch, IBRAHIM Traoré made his entrance. Unlike others in tailored Western suits, Traoré wore his country's traditional military uniform. It wasn't flashy or expensive, but it carried with it a sense of pride and quiet confidence. He didn't rush to mingle or exchange business cards. Instead, he stood observing, poised and patient. When the afternoon session resumed, Traoré was last to present, a position many saw as a formality. The applause was polite, but lukewarm, signaling a lack of real interest. Yet what followed would captivate everyone. Traoré stepped to the podium without slides, documents, or electronic aids. He looked calmly at the audience and said, "Your Royal Highness, distinguished delegates, I have a question for you. When you close your eyes and imagine the future, what do you see?" There was a pause, an uneasy shifting in seats. Do you see taller buildings, faster machines, more efficient industries? He continued, or do you see human beings standing a little straighter, walking a little prouder, dreaming a little bigger? The Crown Prince raised his eyebrows ever so slightly. This was no typical pitch. Traoré moved closer to the audience. For 6 hours, I have listened to discussions about market share, profit margins, and return on investment. All are important, but I have heard little about the one true source of wealth, human potential. He paused to let the statement settle. Your Highness, Saudi Arabia invests wisely in nations with established wealth and infrastructure. But when was the last time you invested in raw human hunger? He then told the story of Musa, a 10-year-old boy from Gango, a small village in Burkina Faso. Musa had never seen electric light. His village had no grid, no generators, nothing. When night fell, their world went dark. 3 months ago, the community installed its first solar panel, funded not by foreign aid or loans, but by Burkina Faso's own agricultural reforms and mining improvements. Traoré held up a weathered photograph of Musa. When that first light bulb shone in Musa's home, Traoré said softly, He said, "Now we can study after sunset. Now we can build something." This simple sentence cut through the room, 10 years old. His first thought was not comfort, but productivity. Traoré stepped away from the podium, his voice steady but filled with passion. "This photograph embodies why I am here. Not for charity or aid, but for partnership. Real partnership between nations that have capital and those with hunger." He looked directly at the Crown Prince. "Your Highness, you have spoken of diversifying Saudi Arabia's economy. You've invested in AI, renewables, tourism, all wise strategies. But your greatest opportunity lies in replacing transactions with transformation." The room shifted uncomfortably. No one had spoken to the Crown Prince so candidly, especially not a leader from a nation with an economy smaller than Saudi Arabia's budget surplus. "But Africa's not a continent begging for handouts," Traoré declared. "We are a continent offering partnership, 54 nations, over 1 billion people, most under 25 years old. A young, energetic population on a land rich with minerals, fertile soil, and renewable energy potential. And we are still writing our story." Traoré pulled out a tablet and projected a map behind him. It showed the Trans-Sahel Infrastructure Corridor, an 8,000-kilometer network of roads, railways, power lines, and communication links stretching from Dakar to Djibouti. 12 nations connected. The largest infrastructure project in African history. Designed, planned, and led by Africans. The project will cost $800 million, Traoré said. Less than Saudi Arabia spends on a single luxury resort, but the impact will be transformative. Connecting West Africa's farms to East Africa's ports, powering Sahara solar farms to fuel industries from Senegal to Sudan, bringing high-speed internet to African universities. The Crown Prince leaned forward, elbows on the table. Traoré addressed him directly. "This corridor will increase Saudi-African trade by 400% within 10 years. It will position Saudi Arabia as a global bridge connecting Africa, Asia, Europe, and the Americas." The presentation grew technical, with financial models and timelines. But Traoré's core message remained clear: partnership, not patronage; investment, not charity; transformation, not transaction. "Your Highness," he said, "great kingdoms are remembered not for what they accumulate, but what they build. The Egyptians built pyramids. The Romans built roads. The British built ships. What will Saudi Arabia build?" He switched off the tablet. "I propose Saudi Arabia build bridges, human, economic, and strategic bridges between the world's youngest continent and its most ambitious kingdom." The room was electrified. This was no longer a formality or token pitch. This was a serious proposal. Traoré stepped back and spoke without technology. "However, I must be honest, I did not come primarily to ask for investment." The room stirred. "I came to offer something more valuable, a place in history, not as a kingdom enriched by oil, but as a kingdom that helped others grow rich from their own resources, not buying influence, but building influence through respect and partnership. The Trans-Sahel Corridor will be built with or without Saudi Arabia. Our neighbors have committed. We have Chinese, European, and American interest. We don't need rescue. We need partnership." The boldness stunned the room. A leader from one of the poorest countries telling a global power their involvement was welcome but not essential. "If Saudi Arabia joins," Traoré continued, "you will invest in the future of South-South cooperation. You will show that wealth is most powerful when it creates more wealth, not when it merely accumulates." He approached the Crown Prince. "Imagine Vision 2050. Saudi Arabia as the nation that helped transform an entire continent. Saudi companies growing with Africa. Saudi students studying in African universities. Saudi investments built. African students researching in Saudi laboratories. This is why I came alone. not with PowerPoint or consultants, not to ask for money, but to speak as one leader to another, offering partnership between equals. He stood before the Crown Prince. True power lies not in dominating markets, but in creating markets. Not in controlling resources, but in developing them. Not in buying loyalty, but earning respect. Silence. The Crown Prince's face unreadable. A pivotal moment hung in the air. Then Mohammed bin Salman spoke. In 5 years, I have heard thousands of pitches, most focused on what Saudi Arabia could give. You are the first to focus on what Saudi Arabia could become. He stood, addressing all. What we witnessed defines the next century of development. President Traoré has not asked us to solve Africa's problems. He has invited us to join Africa's solutions. The Crown Prince announced Saudi Arabia would commit $500 million to the first phase of the Trans-Sahel Corridor. An African Partnership Office would be created in Riyadh, with Traoré invited to chair its advisory board. A historic moment. News of the partnership spread quickly. African markets surged. Social media celebrated leadership and equality. Governments across Africa reached out. Senegal discussed connecting Dakar to the corridor. Ethiopia sought links with Chinese infrastructure. South Africa explored ways to contribute. Back home, Ouagadougou celebrated, for decades ignored. The people now saw their leader as an equal among powerful nations. Yet Traoré remained grounded. A handshake means nothing if we can't deliver. Partnership is proven by performance, not promises. The Trans-Sahel Coordination Office was established. Saudi engineers began feasibility studies. Construction bids and financial networks followed. African and Saudi experts worked side by side. The partnership was built on equality, knowledge sharing, and capacity building. 6 months later, the first phase broke ground. A modest ceremony honored local leaders and workers, the true architects of progress. Jobs were created, skills transferred, a continent's future reshaped. This partnership is more than infrastructure. It's a new model of cooperation based on dignity, respect, and shared growth. And for Musa, the boy who once lived without light, it means a future where dreams are lit by hope and opportunity. This is the power of vision, courage, and partnership.